Historic houses, particularly of the museum variety, have long been appropriated by the broader community to act as a backdrop for significant life events, places in which we celebrate or create traditions, and often special spaces within which to enjoy music. While the venue is highly valued and the details of the history of the building, its interiors, its gardens and former owners may be of little interest or relevance to those planning and attending these events. Often the houses are little more than empty patinated vessels into which the community pours its own tastes, pleasures, relationships and personal understanding of history. Weddings in houses, that's why we move on. On the other side of the coin, Sydney Living Museums has for almost 4 decades combined professionalism, a forensic approach and creativity to connect the public more deeply with New South Wales history through its museums, exhibitions, public programs and research library. Inevitably, there can be a tension between the research-based interpretation of an historic house and the venue for hire. And at times, this may even include our own events. But when it comes to music, there is more to the story. SLM has a long history of supporting innovative music programs along with the more traditional concert series. Curators have also written about musical activity in their properties. But beyond ad hoc publications and performances, until recently there has been no coordinated research by which we can better understand the history of musical activity in our houses, or how this relates to the broader historical context in New South Wales, Australia and further afield. From a research-based perspective, I would argue that generally music at SLM has fallen between the cracks when compared to the rigour apparent in the interpretation across our historic houses and sites. So today I want to focus on how SLM is starting to bring music into its properties through such a research-based approach. While we do not manage the equivalent of a biographical music museum like Handel and Hendrix in London, music plays an important part in most, if not all, of SLM's historic houses and places. Through programs such as the Darling Songbook project, SLM is revisiting its collections and houses and considering the role of music in the lives of those who lived in or are impacted by our historic buildings and their context. There is also evidence that through the collaboration with education institutions, such as the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, this new way of exploring the Australian story of music can have a considerable impact on both performers and audiences alike. The Darling Songbook project was a collaboration led by the Carolyn Simpson Library and Research Collection, the CSL&RC, here at Sydney Living Museums, in partnership with the Historical Performance Division at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. Between July and October 2016, the two institutions developed a musical program for 23 students using historical sheet music, provenance to Sydney in the 1830s, an 1840s square piano, this one here, and the drawing room here at Elizabeth Bay House. 3 concerts were held at the house in early October for a combined audience of 80 people. A further 91 museum visitors experienced music in the house while the students were rehearsing during opening hours. And following on from what Janice was saying earlier about people being in the house when the music's being made by students, it's fantastic. And we got lots of questions and lots of people engaged. We've been playing in the house last weekend. I think the same thing happened, didn't it? Katrina was getting quite a lot of involvement from people just wandering in and getting quite involved. I'm not sure how often one can say a project is truly collaborative, but the Dowling project certainly was, one where both SLM and the SCM were creating a program from the ground up. And at times each of us was outside our respective comfort zones as we worked closely to deliver something that was new. Professor Neil Perez da Costa from the Historical Performance Division managed the project from the con side, and he sends his apologies today, but he's on a mountain in Cape Town, I think. But he really wishes he could be here. So to make up for that, I'm going to play a little film at the end of this session of him talking about the project, and then also a couple of students talking about how it impacted them. For SLM, the Dowling project was the first major historically based performance since we began exploring our music collections and their stories. Since 2011, we've been evaluating our sheet music collections from a musicological and historically informed performance, or HIP, perspective. Detailed bibliographical records have been uploaded to our online library catalogue, along with digital images of music. SLM has represented Australia at the Sound Heritage Network in the UK. Postgraduates such as Nicole Forsyth and Emma Nixon have been working on the sheet music collections, and scholars such as Brianna Robertson-Kirkland have visited from as far as Scotland to explore the richness of our collections. Leading up to the Dowling project, SLM has been engaging interest in the history of domestic music through online activities such as Threads of Connection, a web page developed to promote objects in SLM's collections and includes a section on a sample of our sheet music. Each piece illustrated is accompanied by a 200-word description, which includes any evidence of local use. This is a detailed approach that requires a greater level of research than we have had to apply to the 175 publications we've also added to our online library catalogue. One step up from the Threads of Collections approach is to write SLM web stories. We've added recent music stories published in SLM's magazine Unlocked, and you've all got a copy of that particular music issue in your show bag. And the stories we put together were to accompany events such as the performance by pianist James Doig in 2015 on an 1860s Collard and Collard grand piano for the centenary celebrations of Vaucluse House. James performed the City of Sydney polka by Charles Packer, which had been dedicated to the owner of Vaucluse House, W.C. Wentworth. This web article not only details the story of the polka, but includes the digitised sheet music and a sound file of the piece recorded in the Vaucluse House drawing room on the Collard and Collard. So we've only done one of these, put one of these up online. I've got another one ready to go. But again, it's just a little test of what might be a nice model to have sheet music, have the actual sound file as well, and a bit of a background story. Part of the preparations for the Vaucluse House centenary had included conservation work on the grand piano. We made a short film detailing the processes involved in preparing for an historical performance. This included interviews with the pianist, the piano technician and myself, and the film was narrated by curator Joanna Nicholas. In the last month, we've been beta testing a sample of SLM's digitised sheet music collection, which has been uploaded to Internet Archive. It is findable through Google, word searchable, and links back to extended records in the CSL and RC's library catalogue. And I think we're up to about 150, 160 pieces there. And we've included three whole binders volumes all in one publication, but then they've also been broken up into single publications. And they've been getting quite good hits. It's really surprising what people are interested in. Really pleasing, very nice. Regardless of all this activity, unless there is a section of the SLM website dedicated to providing access to our collections, performances, research and interpretation, a centre of gravity if you like, it's very difficult to communicate what we're doing over so many formats. We need a place to pull together the articles I've mentioned and the curatorial contributions on music-related themes. We're currently working with musicologist Graham Skinner on a range of content that includes narrative outlines and object highlights, links to our sheet music via our library catalogue, as well as links to research and performance relating to our collections. And of course, today's event we hope to put on there at some point fairly soon. And we expect this to be online later this year. The original idea for the Dowling project lies in a discovery made by Graham Skinner in 2011. We commissioned Graham, an expert in 19th century Australian composition and musical culture, to evaluate the sheet music collections in three of our houses, Rouse Hill House, Marugal and Throsby Park. Despite being a preliminary survey, Graham was able to produce a fascinating report that communicated a rich history that has resonated with many who have read it within SLM. The report not only offered a useful study of our sheet music, but helped us contextualise these site-specific collections within the broader musical history of New South Wales. A summary of Graham's report is available in the copy of Unlocked we've given you today. Among the many interesting publications noted in the Skinner report was a bound collection of music for voice and piano located at Rouse Hill House, and which was identified as having national significance. A nondescript collection at first sight, Graham had recognised that this volume was of British publications, had been bound in Sydney, probably in the early 1840s, by music seller Francis Ellard. The majority of the songs in the volume also bore the shop stamps of two local music sellers, and there were a number of professionally copied manuscript scores of songs stamped by Ellard and probably copied out when he'd run out of printed stock. While this was a spectacular find, our subsequent research has uncovered a rip-roaring story. After careful study, we've established that this collection was compiled by a young woman, probably between the early 1830s and 1840. Lilia Dixon, born in Sydney in 1818, was the daughter of John Dixon, a miller and brewer, responsible for bringing the first steam engine to Australia in 1813. Partnering with his housekeeper, Dixon had fathered 7 children by the time of his wife's death during childbirth in 1833. In the same year, the 15-year-old Lily ran off with a con man, an ex-convict called John Dow, who at the time went by the name of Viscount Lascelles. A few days later, Lily was rescued and brought back to Sydney. A couple of months later, Lily's father was prosecuted for forgery and absconded to England while on bail. He left his children, steam mills, and a considerable fortune in the care of a guardian. Not long after, Lily was taken to court by John Dow, who claimed they had married earlier in the year and consummated their marriage, and therefore he was entitled to the girl's fortune. At the hearing, Judge James Dowling dismissed the case, but noted that Lily was a girl of a light reputation and was horrified when his young nephew, James Willoughby Dowling, married the 16-year-old Lily less than 3 months later. This then is their music. It contains songs owned and sung predominantly by Lilius, but also Willoughby. The provenance is solid and the story a good one. We know where the couple lived, and the tragic suicide of the alcoholic Willoughby at the age of 37 is also well documented. The real significance, however, lies in the binding date of the volume and the hints it gives us about how music was performed in 1830s Sydney. Bound in around 1840 to 41, this is the earliest surviving collection of sheet music compiled within Australia. Am I still right? I keep saying this, but we know there'll be something earlier. I just keep saying it until someone says no. But I've tried the Mitchell, I've tried Tasmania, I've tried everybody, but one day. I'm really happy when that happens, but you know. Some of you here have already heard me rather extravagantly describe this volume as the Rosetta Stone of early performance practice in Australia, but I'll explain why I'm tempted. The final publication bound in at the rear of the volume is entitled Grocer's Instructions in Singing. Published in London in the late 1820s, it is stamped with the name of Sydney music and instrument seller William Henry Tyrer. We've been unable to locate another copy of this publication anywhere in the world, so we'd love to hear if anyone comes across it. And we've tried a lot of people through Sound Heritage and not yet, haven't found it. Given that Grocer's instructions include exercises on graces and cadences, we appear to have found a tool that may have helped the young Lilius learn how to sing and ornament her songs in 1830s New South Wales. While this publication would allow us to at least experiment with ornamentation of the Dowling songs, we have an added bonus of 7 songs in the volume that are heavily ornamented in pencil. So is this evidence of the use of Grocer's publication to ornament the songs? Are the markings by Lilia herself or those of a teacher instructing her? These are questions for those with a greater expertise than I have, and it would certainly be interesting to compare this Australian use of ornamentation with other contemporary examples here and in Europe. The Darling Songbook project commenced on 29 July last year with a 2-hour tour of music sources available at SLM's Carolyn Simpson Library and Research Collection. Students from the Historical Performance Division viewed rare book domestic manuals, books illustrating and contextualising houses, interiors, furniture and musical instruments of the 19th century, sheet music provenance to 19th century Australian settlers, and the Dowling Songbook itself. A week later, the cohort met at Elizabeth Bay House for an extended tour of the house and its collections. This was followed by a distribution of the digitised score, rehearsals at the SCM, and then weekly workshops here in the drawing room. In the week leading up to the performances, the students engaged in an intensive rehearsal period in the house. The drawing room was specially configured for the rehearsals and performances, but with the intentions of removing as little of the furniture as possible. 30 reproduction Regency chairs were placed in the room for the audience in a domestic arrangement that avoided rows, so it was quite a mess of chairs. While a square piano was installed in the drawing room for the on-site workshops and the performances. The benefits of this project for both institutions have been numerous, but it was also a project not without its challenges. These included finding an appropriate instrument, the logistics of protecting the collection in the drawing room while providing access for rehearsals and performances, and continually supporting the students in what seemed at times probably a radical approach. While SLM could offer unique collections of sheet music and a historic house contemporaneous with the music, there was no usable piano available at Elizabeth Bay House. Neither of the 2 pianos at the house are suitable for high-level public performance. Neil located the 1840s Collard and Collard square piano in a remarkably original state in Western Australia, and it was acquired with research funds by the SCM and restored by Colin Vanderleck, who's sitting over somewhere here. There he is. The success of the project using such a fine instrument has encouraged SLM to evaluate its own pianos in terms of their history, significance and playability for the longer term. Elizabeth Bay House contains finely interpreted historic interiors with collections of varying rarity and fragility. The project required a full assessment of the possible impact on the drawing room and its collections. If the desired immersive experience for both performers and audience was to be achieved, much of the character of the room needed to be retained. It was agreed to remove a few of the larger pieces of furniture and more vulnerable small pieces of ornament during the period of the project. A member of SLM staff was present in the room to keep an eye on the collection and gently remind the students and staff like me to take care. This approach proved very successful, and both performers and audiences commented on how they'd been transported by the music in what felt such an original setting. The project has been enthusiastically received by performers, audiences and SLM and SCM staff alike. Some of the outcomes have included an opportunity for pre-professional musicians interested in historical performance to be immersed in an early 19th century Australian context, Working with repertoire once owned and played by members of Sydney society in the 1830s and 40s, and within an original historic house, the students articulated surprise and fascination in describing an aspect of Australia's cultural history really completely unknown to them. A little-known musical world and its social setting were revealed to the general public with a degree of interpretive detail that is rarely experienced. The audience response to hearing early Australian repertoire performed using historically informed performance practice in the intimate setting of a contemporary drawing room was very favourable. The collaboration enabled Sydney Living Museums to use sound to bring to life Elizabeth Bay House for its visitors with a degree of research-based authenticity that matched the level of interpretation of the house and its interiors. The development of a model that has a significant pedagogical and interpretive outcomes for both students and the general public and has the potential for ongoing programs. Both Sydney Living Museums and the Sydney Conservatorium have found this collaboration beneficial and have continued the relationship. Tonight, two singers from the Darling project, Nissa Milligan and James Doig, will return here to perform with early keyboardist from Britain, Katrina Folds, in a concert called Here and There, Music at Home in Sydney and London, 1830 to 1845. Once again, sheet music from SLM's collection with early New South Wales provenance forms the core of the concert's program, and the collaboration continues to provide opportunity to those musicians interested in specialising in the interpretation of Sydney's history and cultural heritage. Finally, the Dowling project enabled SLM to experiment with some of the observations of the Sound Heritage Study Days in the UK. The project also provided a demonstrable outcome that was used by SLM to feed back into sound heritage in Britain, as well as the promotion of Sound Heritage Sydney. I'd like to finish with the film of Neil and Nissa and James just talking a little bit about the project from their perspective.
It's been an interesting one, right from the very start. For example, even choosing the music that we would do in this project, it was tricky to get a sense of what we should do, just looking through the book and not really sitting down and trying out all the music. But in the end, I started by choosing the pieces that had annotations in them as a start, and then I chose some of the European music and then some of the lesser known works where I thought that students might experiment a little bit and add in the ornaments and things like that. Then I had to sort of divvy up the music between the students, and that was interesting, trying to work out, well, who's free to do this, who can do it. And they were all very interested. I mean, from the word go, from coming to the talks that Matthew gave to coming to the house and having a tour, they were ignited with interest. Once we'd given out the music, the next stage was just actually getting everyone in the same room and trying it out and getting them into the idea of, getting them used to what sorts of things they should be thinking about. For the singers, it was things like not just the ornaments, but for example, singing with portamento, trying to do the audible slides that were often written into some of these scores, singing what sort of vibrato to use. Diction, of course, a massive one, and we're still battling with that one a bit. Often the words of these songs are a bit strange, a bit hard to understand, and singing in English in any case is difficult. So we've been working on getting them to pronounce things more clearly and singing through that. For the pianists, it's been, how does it feel to play this piano? What do you need to do to get a sound out of it? Because it's quite different, as I explained before. The whole matter of how you play your chords, arpeggiation or not arpeggiation, because this is a big thing in the 19th century, it very much seems like pianists always used arpeggiation in one form or another when they played. So there were a lot of things to think about at that stage, and then we've had a couple of rehearsals at the Conservatorium where we've gone through this in a kind of masterclass situation. And then finally, we came to Elizabeth Bay House a couple of weeks ago, and we've had about 3 sessions in here. And much of that has to do still with working on the music, but also the sound in the room, the balance between the instruments. I mean, we've got some instrumentalists playing as well, so it's been adding those into the mix. And we found very much, for example, that the singers do not get obliterated by the piano, which is wonderful. They've noticed that they can actually do all sorts of things and the piano can't drown them out, Whereas with a modern Steinway grand, you you have to keep thinking about balance and those sorts of issues. I think the students have got masses out of coming here. It's been like an excursion out, so it takes them out of their usual environment, puts them into a new environment, and that immediately gives people the freedom to do things and try things and be silly even. Things that they would think in the conservatorium we mustn't do because it's a conservatorium. You know? It feels like they're at home. It does feel. I actually, when I arrived here this afternoon, I thought, oh, I've come home again. So, yeah, that it's been amazing to be able to come and work in a house like this. And I've had experience of playing in historic houses in Europe, for example, but nothing that's felt so comfortable, because often you just arrive, you're there for a few minutes. I mean, earlier this year, for example, I had to play at Hatchlands in Surrey, in England, and I got off the plane and went straight there and rehearsed on a piano, and went back the next day and did my thing, and you just don't get to be there. Whereas here we've come back several times, and it's a house that's in our city, which is really amazing.
The ornamentation has been really interesting, because if we look at it from a HIP perspective, it needs to be in there. We need to be doing what Lilia wrote, or her teacher, we don't know, wrote in the music. In a modern setting, if I had been given that sheet music and it might have had a few pencil markings in, I would have gone, you know what, just no, I don't, they're not really needed. The audience will understand, they'll still be taken on a journey, and that's fine. But when you're looking at this music from a HIP perspective, you don't have that choice. So some of the ornamentation that Lilius has written in is quite out there, really. Sometimes I think in one of the pieces she's in love with the word round, and every time it comes up, she has to do, she has to go round with the notes, which I personally don't engage with, but you have to throw that away and go, because I'm trying to recreate how she saw this music. I don't play a part in this. It really helped when studying the music, again, because you study it in a practice room with a modern piano and you think, oh gosh, some of these ornaments for real, I just don't, I think it sounds kind of strange. And then when you step into the drawing room and you see even just the nature of the ornaments on the cabinets and all the frames on the paintings, and suddenly the sound world that Lilius has written in, added to the music, makes so much more sense.
I found it amazing to perform this music in Elizabeth Bay House. There was a particular moment when I was performing one of these songs and singing about the sea, and I looked up and I could see through the window the sea, and I thought very much on what it would have been like for the first settlers and the early pioneers of Australia when they first came here, leaving their families behind, their friends behind, and singing these incredibly melancholic songs with the beautiful sea in the background. And then, I guess the remnant of the English culture that they had left behind.